In competitive Ultimate, stages are something that have quite a long and storied history, a history that's still unfolding to this day. In contrast to Melee, where the stage list has been agreed upon for years and the only debates left are things like freezing Pokemon Stadium, Ultimate's stage list is anything but unified, as the Ultimate community is far worse at uniting than the Melee community is. The debate over Ult's stage list has been raging on since the game released, and it's taken us to quite a few interesting places. But even as we narrow down our options, the debate never quite seems to end, and the idea of reaching a satisfying, unified stage list seems further and further away. But the history of competitive Ultimate's stage list is quite interesting. And so today we'll be taking a look at this fascinating history. For this video, we'll be looking at stages that we used to use that we've all banned for the first half, and then in our second half we'll be looking at the current stage list debate and see if we can definitively produce Ultimate's perfect stage list. So first, let's take a look at the history of stages in competitive Smash Ultimate. And for this, we'll be taking a look back to a time long past. Don't Park on the Grass 2018. DPG 2018 is widely considered to be one of Smash Ultimate's first ever majors, with a total of 581 entrants. And let me just say this top 8 looks so weird these days. Big D was still playing King Dedede and Falcon, and characters like Jigglypuff, Donkey Kong, and Incineroar made top 8, even though most of us think of these characters as only recently being proven viable by players like Base Mage, Hikaru, and Skyjet. But that's not what we're interested in right now. Let's take a look at the stage list of Don't Park on the Grass 2018. This is the official stage list, asterisk on official, which we'll come back to later. Seems pretty normal. Town, PS2, Battlefield, and Smashville are all stages you're likely to see on today's stage lists, and they're even starters, which is common these days too. However, Final Destination was a starter, a stage that is somewhat more contentious these days on whether or not it should be a starter or a counterpick, mostly because of volatile characters like Min Min and Kazuya on FD being so powerful. However, those are just the starters. Once you look down to the counterpicks, things get pretty wild. Of course, there's Kalos Pokemon Stadium, a stage we will be talking about later on, but there are also two other stages here, Yoshi's Island from Brawl and Castle Siege. So yeah, if you're a quarantine kid unfamiliar with 2018 Smash, we actually used to play on these stages. Also of note is the fact that the Omega and Battlefield variants of stages are all 100% legal. However, the question should be asked, why are these stages no longer used? Well, Yoshi's Island and Castle Siege are pretty easy to answer. It's because of slants. Slants are something that the majority of the Smash community nowadays considers to be a bad thing. They don't cause favorable interactions for any character and don't really deepen play in an interesting or creative way. They kind of just get in the way. Now, no character in the game is massively inconvenienced by slants either, which is why you see them in some stages whose legality is still debated, like Yoshi's or Lilat. But the slants of both Yoshi's Island and Castle Siege are too large, taking up a big portion of the stage. This is why these stages were banned. Additionally, Castle Siege doesn't have symmetrical platforms, which isn't necessarily a requirement that people often discuss, but all legal stages in this game nowadays have symmetrical platforms to make things fair for both competitors, no matter which side of the stage you happen to spawn in on. Lastly, Omega and Battlefield variants have debated legality even to this day. For what it's worth, some tourneys still allow these to be used, but both players have to agree to it. And when we're discussing gentlemening, technically every stage in the game is legal. The reason that these aren't widely used though is the fact that these Battlefield and Omega versions, meant to replicate Battlefield and FD, only resemble them superficially with platform placement and stage length. The problem here is the blast zones, the end of the stage where your character dies if they get flung far enough. These variants actually have different size blast zones than Battlefield or Final Destination do, although the difference is kind of slight. Also, there's some debate about Steve. Of course, Steve wasn't a consideration in 2018, but Steve mines materials based on what stage he's on, and the Omega Battlefield variants have set values for what Steve will mine. These values are different than Battlefield or FD though, marking yet another difference between these two stages that are supposed to be identical. For these reasons, variants are typically banned these days in tournament. This brings us to the end of the tournament that I wanted to mention, but before we end off this half of the video, let's go over a few more stages that used to be legal but aren't anymore, and why. First off, we have Dreamland and Fountain of Dreams, both stages that are legal in Melee. The reason that these are banned, to my understanding, is that they're really similar to Battlefield and take up space that could be occupied by a more unique stage. Particular to FOD, some people reported frame rate issues on this graphically intense stage, which is why FOD was basically dead in the water. A real shame, as this is one of the prettiest stages in the entire game. Pokemon Stadium would probably be a legal stage if it weren't for PS2 being just better in every regard, so, you know. People briefly played around with Frigate Orpheon being legal until we all realized that was a stupid idea. People played with WarioWare being legal for a time, except that this stage is too small, has weird platforms, and has walls, and that's 3 strikes for WarioWare. People actually bring up this stage being legal from time to time, but no one who wants this stage legal is doing it with good intentions. They just want to cheese you at 40%. That or they just really hate Steve. Unova Pokemon League probably would still be legal if it weren't for the slants on the side of the ledges, which can mess up teleport recoveries, notably Palutena's. And since she was a very popular character early on in Ult's meta, and Palumanes wanted this stage gone, this stage was not long for this world. Hey, remember when people wanted Woohoo Island to be legal? Is the legalized Woohoo Island guy still around? Does anyone know? Midgar was banned for the same reason as FOD. It's just another battlefield, and we didn't need another battlefield. Also, the music on this stage would get Twitch streams copyright struck, the final nail in its coffin. Lilac Cruise was legal for a long time, but was banned because of the slants. However, it is worth noting that many have wanted this stage re-legalized, as the platforms are unique and competitive, and this stage has competitive value. And I have no idea where I would put this stage, so I'll just put Wily Castle right here. No one's really wanted this stage for the longest time, until recently, as people are saying it's a better final destination. I'm not really sure about all that, but Wily Castle has walls, which means that it probably won't replace FD anytime soon. Pretty much every DLC stage has been considered for legal use, with many being denied for one reason or another, but the only one that actually saw some tournament usage was Mementos, which was eventually banned because it had a slant and wasn't symmetrical. And that ends this segment, and the first half of the video, looking at the vast history of stage experimentation and why we don't use any of these stages anymore. But now it's time for us to talk about the current stage debates. For the most part, we've all unified in terms of what stages we want. It's mostly just the distinction of counterpick versus starter and the inclusion of DSR that people disagree on. However, there are exceptions to this. Dear viewers, it's time to talk about Yoshis Story. Yoshi's Story is mostly legal in online tournaments, but rarely is found in a big offline tournament every once in a while. This stage is interesting as it has slants on its side. If we took Lila as an example, this stage would already be banned. But it's a legacy stage, with Yoshi's Story being legal in Melee, so people are more welcoming to Yoshi's. But Yoshi's has an additional problem that Lilat doesn't have. The blast zones are tiny. Why is this a problem? Well, because of things like this.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And because of things like that. Because you...
Me personally, I don't think Yoshi should be legal, but for some reason this stage has stuck around and refuses to die, mostly because I think of online tournaments. You see this stage a ton online because of the way StartGG does stage settings. If you've ever hosted an online tourney, you know that you can't make your own stage list and you have to pick from a few pre-made ones. And these lists are so outdated, you're basically picking the lesser of every evil. I think if you really want Yoshi's, try replacing it with Lilat. It's a more unique platform layout with non-egregious blast zones. You might think I'm crazy, but just try it out and see what happens. Then again, I think the ideal stage list doesn't have Yoshi's or Lilat, but before we get to what I think is the best stage list, we have one more debate to cover. The debate of Northern Cave versus Kalos Pokemon League. The story of Northern Cave is one that really makes me sad, because I love this stage. In a perfect world, this stage is the obvious replacement for Kalos, and we have a unified list. But we don't live in a perfect world, and this stage is imperfect. How is it imperfect? The killer here is the background. Many people will talk at length about how the background of this stage distracts them. Me personally, I don't find it distracting or harmful to my eyes, but the fact that it's such a large part of the community saying this is telling. Personally, I think since so many people describe this same issue, it's not overblown, and this really sucks too. Kalos is a flawed stage because of the walls beneath the stage. I don't have a huge problem with walls, but the fact that Kalos is the only stage with them means that they're either unimportant or very important, and I'd rather just have it be consistent across all stages. Northern Cave would have been just a better Kalos if they did what they did to Lilat and make the background static when hazards were off. While many locals across the world swap between Kalos and Northern Cave, I think, very sadly, that Northern Cave just isn't the play. But that brings us to the final question. What is the optimal stage list? I think for the most part that no DSR and 3 bans has been somewhat agreed upon by the majority of the scenes. But which stage list, a combination of starters and counterpicks, is the best one? Well, dear viewers, may I introduce you to the Midwest Unified Stage List. This is the Midwest Unified Stage List, what I think is the best stage list in Ultimate. It is being adopted all over the Midwest, pretty much 100%, and has started to be adopted at other tournaments across the US, like Riptide 2023 for example. And yes, this video is just me once again using my platform to spread Kansas City propaganda, since this stage list was formulated by TOs around this area. But what do you think of this stage list? I'm sure the comments will be fierce and fiery, but tell me what you think the ideal stage list is down below. That's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out to my patrons, Seth Lassner and Fox333, my YouTube members, Storm Trooper, Loco Soko, Mattoon, Robopoke, Chavo, DTR Jr., my teacher members, Mike G90K. Additionally, shout out gifted members Dane H, Zesta, Jake M, Renzage, Interesting YouTube Observer, Undutiful Hades 6, Neo, Renario Uwu, Sal, Serix, Anna S, Call the Piplup, Elib919, Spook is a Little Devil, HSF, The Seraph, Hans, Neon Zaicho, and Ugandan Knuckles and Otaku. Tomorrow I'll be covering the European Tournament Gaming Hotel 2023, but until then, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so much for watching.